Welcome to Voices Carry, a podcast series hosted by Jim Giebutowski, CEO of Marketing Messages, a global voiceover services firm, and his wife, Janet Kraus, a Boston-based startup CEO and former professor of entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School. Jim and Janet interrupt their life of marital bliss to discuss how professional voiceover plays a critical role in creating a brand-affirming customer experience for businesses, from pizza shops and auto dealers to multinational corporations with global call center systems featuring languages spoken around the world.
Well, hello there, Jim.
Hi, Janet.
Welcome to your podcast.
It's good to be here.
Probably best to start at the beginning and ask you, what's this podcast going to be about?
All right, Janet, well, we're going to talk about cocktail parties.
Awesome. Cocktail parties, always a fun conversation.
And what people talk about when they hear the word voice talents at cocktail parties. And we'll also talk about why we don't let Aunt Mary do recordings for us at Marketing Messages.
That is a good principle. And I have actually seen you field this question at cocktail parties. Before we get into it, I thought it would be worthwhile to kind of share a little of the backstory, how you actually got into being in voice talent. You spent most of your career, since I've known you, in high-tech marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And part of your stint was actually working for a voice recognition company, right?
That's right.
And somewhere around, I think it was 2013, you said, you know what, I think I'd really like to run my own show.
Yeah.
You looked around and you found this company that ironically was located a couple towns away. And after interviewing the guy who owned the company, you decided, let's give this a shot. Isn't that sort of how it happened?
That's how it happened. And maybe you could talk a little bit about my first day.
Yeah, that was fun. So first day in the new company, and you come home from the office and you're like, oh my gosh, you are not going to believe who my first order was from. And I said, no, I have no idea. And you said, your old company. And I thought to myself, what an amazing, first, a small world story. And second of all, you better get that one right.
Yeah, we put a little bit of extra effort. I remember that you're still talking with the CIO.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make sure we made a good impression.
I think you did. It's been all uphill since then. So as you said, we're going to talk about voiceovers. And I think people would probably like to know, what does that actually mean? What kind of world are you in?
Well, most people, when they think of voiceovers, they think of the movie guy, right? So let me see if I can actually do this. In a world where no one is safe and everyone is running, one man, one enemy, he is. Right, you probably recognize
that's pretty good.
That's Don LaFontaine. It was a very bad impersonation of him, but he's the god in our industry. And other names that people mention oftentimes are James Earl Jones,
sure,
Morgan Freeman, but we don't do that. That's not what we do.
Oh, that's not what you do?
No.
Okay. What do you do?
Well, instead of movie trailers, we do voiceover for businesses. So if you think about voice talents recording when, for example, a customer calls in, whether it's calling in through the telephone or maybe looking at a video on a website, we're the recorded voice that they hear. So it could be anything from a simple auto attendant application. So welcome to Janet's Bakery, press 1 for Janet, press 2 for the doughboy.
Yeah.
Right, that kind of thing. But it could go all the way up to a large, complicated call center or interactive voice response system where you're actually guiding a caller through a transaction. It involves getting information from a computer database.
Right.
And that's a whole different skill set that we'll talk about. And we also do messages on hold. We also do narration for videos. And we do this in over 80 languages around the globe.
So you mean when I call in and I get an automated voice and I'm pushing through those buttons, that's what you do?
Yes.
And that's where people go, that's what you do? That kind of feeling of, Urgh.
Yeah, well, that's actually what we do. And, back to the cocktail parties, that's when I say, or when people say, I hate what you do.
Yeah, I've seen that. And what do you say?
Right. I mean, I guess what I say is I hate it too. I hate calling in someplace and not being able to get a person, right? I think we can all relate to that. But what I hate more is when I hear voices that I can't stand.
Right.
Just because I'm professionally attuned to it. And it's always hey, Jim, my sister, my mother, my brother, my uncle, they all have a great voice, right? And at the end of the day, these people can't do this. It's like me saying that I could be a great lawyer because I've been arrested a couple times.
Good analogy.
Right,
Probably not true. Just have a good voice can't necessarily be a professional voice talent.
That's right. Professional voice talents are just that. They're professions.
Is it your experience that what people are really reacting to when they say they hate it, it's that they've listened to a call tree where it's just poorly done, and that's what they're finding frustrating?
Right. That's a really big piece of it.
Got it. So how do you see using professional voice talent as a way to have people kind of say, oh, that was actually not noticeable, or that was a wonderful experience?
Right, right. I think what we need to do is kind of back up and look at this from the strategic business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
What people really want when I talk to them is they want to have a great brand experience, right? Because really, you want every single interaction you have with your customer to be absolutely reflective of your brand. And it could be through voice, it could be through website, it could be through really anything. But voice is particularly important because oftentimes it's the first thing that they hear when they call in. And it could be the majority of the time that they interact with you is through the telephone. So you really want to have the person who's recording project professionally. And what that means is they project with emotion, they're very clear with the way they speak, and also they're very accurate with the way they speak.
Yeah, those things feel like your table stakes for creating an experience that feels, yeah, as you said, professional.
Right, right. And really what we try to do is something we call voice marketing. It's all about brand alignment. It's taking the voice characteristics of the voice talent and making sure that they match your brand or your customer experience. I'll give you an example of this. We actually have a major retailer that we now work with on a regular basis. And when we first went in, what we found is they had a different voice for everything. So they had a different voice for their auto attendant, their call centers, their on hold music. They even had different voices coming out of the kiosks they had in their store. And what we did is we said, let's just step back for a second and say, who is your customer?
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
What are you trying to do with your customer? What kind of emotions are you trying to elicit when people call in or interact with you?
And when you do that, do you actually get to adjectives that sort of describe the brand
Right.
so that you're connecting? You know who does this really well? I don't even know if you've worked with them. JetBlue does this really well. If you think about it, like the text that they use, the visuals they use, and then even the voice of the flight attendant, like it's all aligned. It's kind of this irreverent, cheeky, straightforward, and super friendly attitude. I bet that's sort of where you're going with
Right,
this.
right. And where we got to is they wanted somebody who projected as warm, smooth, and luxurious.
Ooh, those are good adjectives.
And so we looked through our voice talent list and we came up with Miranda, who's one of our best voice talents.
I don't think my voice is warm, luxurious, and what?
Oh, it's all of those things.
Oh, thanks, honey. No, but that's cool that you actually can imagine a voice or get to a voice that matches with adjectives. That's great.
Yeah. And oftentimes you can shift voices based on what you're trying to accomplish. So we work with a biopharma company and they were using voice to voice enable a drug survey. So if you picture a drug survey, the drug goes out to the community or to the people who are testing it, and they're supposed to call in and say when they took the drug and what their symptoms were and so forth. So like most healthcare or biopharma companies, you want to project as warm and empathetic during most of the transactions. However, what they wanted to do was to make the participant feel guilty if they didn't take their medication at the prescribed time. So we came up with another voice talent with a more stern approach.
Oh, that's so interesting.
To elicit that kind of action. So it really kind of depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish.
So there's definitely like intentionality here. You're not just picking Susie in marketing who happens to be able, or as you said earlier, Aunt Mary.
Right.
It's really about finding professionals who do this and then matching their voice quality or asking them to take their voice quality and be a certain way, whether that's warm and luxurious or in the case you just said, sort of stern. That's cool.
Right.
So what is it that helps you to understand if a voice talent is professional versus your average person in marketing or IT?
Right. Again, back to the cocktail party, right? You know, Joe or Debbie isn't going to be able to keep the same pace, the same style, the same intonation every time they record. I mean, these systems can be 3 to 5 years long. in their life. So you have to make sure that everything is consistent throughout. One example of this, another company that we started working with, we found out that the CEO called in, it was a hospital, called into the company and came to IT and said, this is awful. I called in and it sounded unprofessional and it seemed like there were 3 different voices throughout the entire call. And so we went back and we pulled all the WAV files and listened back. And in reality, it was actually one person for most of the transaction. And they just weren't following that. In fact, what we found out when we looked back is they found somebody in IT, I think her name was Linda, and they outfit her place with a studio and gave her a microphone and set her up and so forth. And she did the first set of recordings. And then a year later, they had to add a few products and services, so they updated the call flow. And so, they went back to Linda, and maybe that day Linda wasn't as peppy as she was the first time. And it might be that she was a little closer to the microphone or maybe a little bit too far away.
Yeah.
Maybe her elbow scraped the table or she was in a different part of the house. So it sounds completely different.
Even though it's the same person, it can sound completely different. And she's not a professional, so how would she know?
And then she gets fired or terminated or transferred or so forth. And then they find Bill, right? Because there's nobody else to do the recordings.
Yeah.
So now Bill records different studio, different microphone, different acoustic characteristics of the room.
Yeah, I've totally had that experience. You're listening to Linda and all of a sudden you get somewhere else and then it's a completely different experience and you sort of feel hijacked.
Exactly.
Like, now where am I? You kind of get disoriented, and I think that's what people react badly to.
Right. Absolutely.
Now, you started at the beginning, you gave the example of Janet's Bakery, and I would love to have a bakery, but I don't. And you also told me at another point that that's a very basic, simple auto attendant, but then there's also these really much more complex systems, like maybe a banking system or an airline system.
Right.
So what's the difference, and how do voice talents know how to participate in those more complex systems?
Right. It's an entirely different skill set. In fact, we don't let people record in a large complex system until they've demonstrated competence in that first more simple system. But in voice work, longer is easier, right? If you do a long piece for video, for example, shorter is actually harder. So I think about your CEO, and I've seen you speak. You're a superb speaker, public speaker.
Why, thank you.
And you know the challenges of speaking. However, I think it would take a while for you to learn how to do this particular kind of voice work.
Yeah, I have no idea how you would make it short. I just say whatever's going on in my head. So tell me what it looks like to do short voice work.
Right. So think about a telephone banking application, right? It's back and forth between the customer and the system. And let's just say that you're transferring money from one account to the other. So the transaction would sound like this. You want $300 transferred on Friday, January 8th from your checking account to your savings account, correct? Now, I'm not a professional voice talent, so...
Sounded good to me.
That's right.
I'd listen to you.
But in reality, what that is a series of 10 different small, short recordings. So we record those as separate recordings, physical.
Like what would be a segment?
Right. So you want... $300, which is pulled from the system, transferred on, and then Friday. So on and on.
You're recording each of those little segments.
That's right.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the voice talent has to know and to use a rising inflection or a falling inflection or a neutral inflection.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's important. And so if you could imagine if you didn't do this, it would sound something like this. You want $300 transferred on Friday, January 8th from your checking account to your savings account.
Total Robotron, if you don't know how to shorten your voice into little segments. Got it. Yeah.
Right.
Totally get that. So that's another part of being professional at this. Now, I also know, on top of simply the voice talent and their skill set and picking the right talent, there's some other ingredients to a good experience. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, and really it's what happens before the recording and then after the recording. So before the recording, it's the script, right? You want the script, the words to match the style of the voice talent's delivery, right?
Yeah, and I suppose the brand too.
Right, that's correct. So let's just take an example. This is from a transportation company we work with. There's a statement that you could make. Let me just get right into it. you'll be transferred momentarily to the next available operator. Right? So that's very formal.
Yeah, bit transactional, bit distant.
Right. And in fact, that's the way it used to be. That's the preference that people had up until maybe a couple of years ago. Now the trend has gone to more informal. So when we heard their recordings, they said, well, why don't you go and just record with this new style? Here's the script, go for it. Right? In reality, we looked at it and said, look, you really need to change the script to match the delivery. So what we changed it to was, we're with another customer right now, but we'll be right with you in a moment. So, again, not a voice talent, right? But you can tell no matter how good a voice talent you are, you're not going to make that first formal phrasing sounding formal no matter what you do.
You will be transferred momentarily to the next operator sounds
inauthentic.
Totally inauthentic. No,
Right.
I get it. So scripting, that makes perfect sense. You have to have the script and the voice can be contiguous and be aligned with the brand.
Right. That's correct.
Okay, but then there's the part that we're doing right now, which is the actual recording. And I know there's a lot involved in that. Can you talk about that?
Right. And then it's actually after the recording, we call it post-processing. So this is when audio engineering comes into play. And we have a saying at Marketing Messages, a mouth has a mind of its own. And if you think about it, when people speak, there's all sorts of mouth sounds that come out. We call them pops and clicks that get picked up. You also have people breathing because you can hear their breathing, but you also hear these extraneous words like and so forth. I do it all the time when I speak. And then there's extra noises. So, I'm thinking about a customer we have where we record regularly in 15 different languages. In a couple of the countries in which the recording takes place, there's a political stability problem, right? So we had voice talent recorded, and then when the engineers picked it up, they heard gunshots.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness.
In the background. So the art of this is really to go through all this and take out all of these sounds. And then the other piece of it too is audio has their own audio characteristics, right?
Yep.
So things like volume and peak volume, the loudest it's going to sound in the entire recording, compression, audio compression, also the amount of space that you might put in between when the file starts and when the voice talent actually starts speaking.
Yep.
So all of that's very, very important, and you need to get it consistent. So we had another client in the credit card processing space, and they had one particular phone line where they had people from different languages or spoke different languages would be calling in. So it was press 1 for English, press 2 for French, press 3 for German, press 4 for Italian, all spoken together with 4 different voice talents. And what they did before we got there, the English sounded echoey, right? Mm-hmm. The French sounded nice and clean. The German sounded odd along a bunch of different dimensions. It was a lot louder than the other ones. It was obvious that another microphone was used. In the Italian, there was just a lot of space between the beginning and the end of the file. So when they put it all together, it just sounded like a mishmash of alphabet soup. It was just horrible. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's, again, I can imagine that's the kind of thing that people get really sensitive to because it just doesn't sound fluid,
right?
And
warm, smooth, and luxurious.
Well, it's not warm, smooth, and luxurious.
That's right.
Exactly.
Well, it's funny. Our technical director is a stickler for this kind of thing. He's this 6'5", large guy, really nice guy, but he takes these details seriously. You don't want to piss him off, right? So.
He is one of the nicest people I've ever met. But you have to be. I mean, this is getting this right. You want people to not notice your voice attendant.
That's
you
right.
want that to be an experience that kind of falls away, and that's details. That's really in the details. So if you had to sum up sort of your personal philosophy on what you do, what would you say?
I think we can go back to where we started, which is really your brand matters. Your brand matters to us. And, you talk about detail, and I think that's a very important part of my philosophy around this because you really have to spend a lot of time thinking about the detail and executing on the detail, whether it's thinking about the brand and bringing in the absolute right person, right? Being very specific about that, being very specific about all of the audio engineering that I mentioned, because really you don't want to have to worry about this if you're the customer, right? That's right. What you've hired us to do. So we take all of this extremely seriously. Again, it's a serious profession. It's not for Aunt Mary to just do on the side between knitting sessions. This is what people do when they take it dead seriously.
Well, I mean, I have to say that's a very serious way to end this interview when we started at a cocktail party.
Well, you know I'm not a serious guy all the time, Jim, right?
I do know this, which is why this is an interesting place to end.
I just want to be loved at cocktail parties. That's all I want.
Jim, you are loved at cocktail parties.
Or, well, I don't say I don't want to be noticed at cocktail parties, but I don't want our customers to notice anything about what we do. I just want them to be happy. In fact, if they don't notice or say anything at the end, I know that you've done
your job. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I hope this interview has been helpful to those of you who are listening today and have any kinds of voice projects. Jim, if you want to just share with our listeners how they can get in touch with you.
Sure.
You want to do that?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, I would say, don't wait until you have a project. I'm more than happy to talk with you months in advance if you have any issues or questions and so forth. But if you do want to get a hold of us quickly, just go to our website, www.marketingmessages.com, and fill out a contact us form, and we'll get a hold of you, and happy to help in any way we can.
And you will enjoy talking to Jim. He's a fun guy to talk to, I have to say.
Well, thank you, Janet. This whole thing's been fun. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for being here. And thanks, listeners, for joining. Bye now.